As I sat in my patrol car, the radio's piercing tone broke the silent monotony of the late afternoon. It was my anniversary, and my mind had been wandering back to the plans I'd made for my wife and I. Just 30 more minutes, and I'd be heading home to celebrate 22 years of marriage. But fate had other plans. The call came in as a routine welfare check, the kind I'd handled countless times before. We would respond to welfare checks typically to check on Grandma or Grandpa since no one's seen or spoke to them in a while. Oftentimes it was a simple solution, the good case being that they lost their phone and everything was fine. Although there were times, unfortunately, when we make location and find that the person was deceased. This call, however, was located on the outskirts of the city, an area notorious for its rampant drug use and violent crimes. As I was responding to the location, the dispatcher advised me that the caller reported suspicious behavior from their niece. My unit serpentined through the littered streets outlined by rundown buildings and graffiti-covered walls. This wasn't my usual beat, but I was familiar enough with the reputation of this part of town. Approaching the address, the sense of decay was heavy. The house itself had boarded up windows and a rusted chain-link fence, which seemed to mirror the desolation of its surroundings. The fence was covered with overgrown vines that had taken residence after years of neglect. I made my way towards the house as I carefully stepped down the small path made of broken concrete pavers being consumed by the earth. The yard's tall, uncut grass towered to my waist. The tops of rusted car parts, broken furniture, and other unidentified debris fought to find a place in the sun once more. The front porch's rotten wooden steps creaked and nearly buckled under my boots. The house from the porch seemed dark and vacant, showing no signs of life. I peered cautiously through the window and could barely make sense of anything through the grimy layer of built-up dirt that covered the glass. I slowly raised my flashlight and knocked on the front door. "Police department, open up!" I waited there for a moment, as it seemed that my knocks were going unanswered, making me second-guess whether I was at the right house. I turned to walk back to my patrol car to go verify the home's address, when an old man's voice emerged from somewhere beyond the old wooden door. "Police department!" I exclaimed again. But this time I could hear him more clearly, as an elderly man slowly opened the door to greet me. The old man explained to me that he was the one who called, and that his niece was upstairs in her room not acting like her usual self. He went on further to explain that this was her place, and that he was just temporarily staying there for the month. With a loud groan, he gestured for me to see for myself, as he pointed to the inside. As I stepped into the house, I was immediately met with a putrid smell. Boxes and other items were stacked up on both sides from floor to ceiling, leaving a small, narrow, constricting path that winded throughout the remainder of the house. It was a hoarder house. It was so full of junk that the inside was dark as piles obscured the house's windows, preventing even the natural daylight from seeping through. I followed the small, narrow trail through the house as I fought hard to keep my claustrophobia at bay. With each step, it only got darker and more narrow, so much so that I had to turn sideways to be able to fit down the passage. After a prolonged search, I eventually discovered the narrow staircase. Its newer appearance was conspicuous, clearly an add-on that wasn't a part of the house's original construction. With every step I took, the floor beneath me creaked and sagged, as though it struggled to bear my weight. Upon reaching the top, I was met with a solitary closed door. Adjacent to the door, occupying the limited space on the landing, sat what seemed to be a small shrine. A handcrafted wicker doll was positioned at the center of a small pentagram drawn on the floor. Each point of the symbol was adorned with a flickering candle, casting an eerie glow in the confined space. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I contemplated retreating and calling for backup. Of course, I didn't want to be that guy. The guy that everyone would make fun of back at the station, because I got a little scared of the boogeyman. So obviously, I didn't call for backup. I stood there a moment in the silence as I tried to listen for any signs of life on the other side of the old door. I could hear a small, incomprehensible whisper. I slowly opened the door to find a dark, nearly empty room. The windows were covered, obscuring my vision. I wrapped my arm around the door and located a single light switch. I attempted to flip it on, but of course, the light didn't work. My flashlight's weak beam revealed a small, frail girl sitting in the middle of the room. She was seated on the wooden floor with her back turned towards me. She didn't respond to my voice when I called out to her, and just continued to rock back and forth, her long hair covering her face. I slowly walked towards her, begging her to please show me her hands. Again, no response, as she continued to rock slowly. The closer I got, the more loud her whispers became. At this point, I was so close now that I could place my hand on her shoulder. I knelt down and softly spoke out once more. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Her eyes were dark and hollow, and her face was pale. Sweat glued tiny strands of her hair to portions of her face. I hastily radioed into dispatch, requesting both an additional officer as well as an ambulance to make scene. I stood up as she continued to whisper the phrase, "Gula, gula, gula," still oblivious of my presence there. My flashlight beam swept across the walls, and my heart skipped a beat, as I saw what appeared to be satanic symbols, painted in red all over the walls. "Is this blood?" I thought to myself, as I slowly walked around the room. "I need to get out of here." My radio screeched as the responding officer asked for my location. I knew he would have a difficult time locating me through the house's maze of junk, so I went downstairs to meet up with him. When I got to the front porch, I met up with my partner, and I filled him in on everything that was going on. We both turned and made our way through the maze of junk once more, and up the small set of stairs. Reaching the stair landing, I flashed my light to the small shrine to show my partner. However, prior to turning away, I noticed that all 5 candles on the pentagram were now extinguished. Not saying anything, I turned to the door and opened it once more, and we both entered the room. "Well, where is she?" my partner called out. "What do you mean, where is she?" I frantically questioned, as my flashlight swept across the empty room. "She was literally sitting right here," I explained as I gestured to the floor. Like I said earlier, the room was entirely empty, and there was no possible place for her to hide. We glanced at the windows, thinking maybe she managed to open one and escape. But upon pulling aside the curtains, we observed that burglar bars secured to the outside would have prevented her from doing so. We walked back down the stairs and eventually made our way to the front porch. The old man was still sitting there, his attention fixed on a small crow that was perched on the rusted fence out in front of his house. "Sir, have you seen your niece? She isn't upstairs and we can't find her." The old man slowly shook his head as he continued to watch the crow and avoided eye contact with me. Once my partner left the scene, I sat out by the street in my patrol car as I finished up with my report. I glanced down at my phone and noticed I had 3 missed calls from my wife, most likely wondering when I'd be home. Just as I was about to return my wife's calls, I was met with the abrupt sounds of whispers replaying in my mind. The whispers I had heard from the young girl upstairs. Gula, gula, gula. What did that mean? Gula, gula, gula. I opened my web browser and typed out the words. Immediately I was met with a Latin to English translator on top of the first page. Beside the Latin words gula, gula, gula were the English translation. Gluttony, gluttony, gluttony. Gluttony was one of the 7 deadly sins. It meant to overindulge and to live past your means. I was immediately taken back down the winding maze lined with junk from floor to rafter of that house. A clear sign of overindulgence to life's pleasures.